quickly looking at the quarterback and running back waiver options for you for Week 13. And we'll start with the quarterbacks on a bye. That's right, we're back to having teams on a bye, and just two of them, Cardinals and the Panthers. So you don't have Kyler Murray or the great Sam Darnold, so he won't be stop, drop, and roll into the end zone this time like he did last week against the Broncos. But hey, you got DJ Moore going, so that was the big positive for Sam Darnold. The quarterbacks to add this week, not a lengthy list, but a few options that could be starters for you right away. Jared Goff has been fantastic at home. Mike White was fantastic last week. Jordan Love may start for Aaron Rodgers, and Ryan Tannehill could have had 17 fantasy points if Derrick Henry did not fumble. He's thrown for over 600 yards in his last two games. Not an easy matchup against Philadelphia, but as I've said for the last several weeks, he finds a way to get it done. Maybe he gets back to getting 17 or more points this week against the Eagles, who just lost to C.J. Gardner-Johnson for the remainder of the season with a lacerated kidney. Let's talk about Jared Goff. So it feels icky to always say Jared Goff because, he kind of just feels like the type of quarterback that will let you down. But at home, fantastic. Once again, home last week against the Bills, 240-2, 21 fantasy points. He's been 18 or more points in 5 of 6 home games this season, and the Jaguars, we know, not exactly the best pass defense. So does Jared Goff have the ability in one quarterback leagues to be a starter for either of you this week?
Not for me. He'll be a streaming option. So if you're without Kyler Murray and you didn't protect yourself with getting another quarterback, he's someone that you could consider. I don't like that over those last 7 games. The best he's done was what he did on Thanksgiving, which is 21 fantasy points. And when I compare him to Mike White, I see a quarterback who might throw a little bit more in White, who has a better receiving core, and who's got just as good of a matchup. So for this week, I like White better than Goff. If it's a rest of season thing, then maybe I'd take Goff, but I also might rather take Jordan Love because I think he's going to get a lot of run once the Packers are officially eliminated from playoff contention.
I hope Jameson Williams changes things because since TJ Hawkinson left, he's not thrown for more than 240 yards in a game. He was a guy who was throwing for a lot of yards, a lot of touchdowns earlier in the year. And really, it's been his 2 home games since then. He's had multiple touchdown passes, and so he's snuck up to that 18 to 20 point range. But I do think he needs a second option to emerge. Hopefully, Jameson Williams can do that.
He's got one.
Yeah.
It's the revenge game, the DJ Chark revenge game. Chark Sport against the Bills. Maybe he finds the end zone again.
Right.
Now that he's getting a little bit healthier coming back from that extended absence. So we'll see how he does. And Dave, like you said, you liked Mike White a little bit better, understandably so. Coming off of his one big game against the Bears. We saw it last year, though. One big game against the Bengals, and then he turned to a pumpkin. Is he going to avoid doing that this week?
I think he will. I think he'll have the chance to avoid becoming a pumpkin this week because it's the Vikings, and that secondary still has some holes in it. 5 of the last 6 quarterbacks to take on Minnesota have put up at least 21 fantasy points. And you see that he only attempted 28 passes against Chicago. This was a game the Jets had in hand. I think they'll be trailing in this game, so he should throw as many as 35 passes in this game. And if he's getting 300 yards on 28 pass attempts, he should be able to get that again against Minnesota. A little bit worried about the turnovers there because he played such a clean game against Chicago, and it's Chicago and their defense is so bad. The Vikings are a step up in competition, but I love the way that Garrett Wilson has been playing. I think he can make good numbers with Garrett Wilson. Elijah Moore's been doing well too. I just like this receiving core better. I like the opportunity better for White.
Yeah, I think he will turn into a pumpkin. It's just one more week at Buffalo is probably when he turns into a pumpkin. I do think, like Robert Saleh said it, he did a good job of making easy look easy. The Bears' secondary was awful. The Vikings won't be that bad, but they do leave guys wide open, and White seemed to do a good job of finding guys wide open.
Yep, it's going to be interesting to see how things go for him on the road. Playoff caliber team, one of the best teams just by a record standpoint in the NFL. Hopefully Mike White does deliver, but mostly gets the ball to Garrett Wilson and maybe gets Elijah Moore going after finding the end zone for the first time last week. And then you got Jordan Love, who came on for Aaron Rodgers in the game last week against Philadelphia after Rodgers suffered the rib injury, and now Rodgers talking about potentially not playing this week. So Heath, when we look at Jordan Love, is this going to be a big game for him if he starts against the Bears, who are without Eddie Jackson, which kind of helped Mike White as well?
He has probably more upside than the other guys we've talked about. If everything goes right for him, if the Bears defense is as beat up as it was last week, and we think it mostly will be, he has the upside to be a top 12 quarterback. I don't have him ranked the highest because I do have a little bit of concern about what he'll look like over a full game, but absolutely a ton of upside with Christian Watson and Allen Lazard.
I'm worried about how much he'll even have to throw. This could be a game where he can get away. You saw that Mike White had 28 pass attempts against Chicago. Jordan Love might only attempt 20 passes against Chicago. He'll run a little bit too, and we've seen flashes of Jordan Love look good, play well, not just last week, but also in the preseason, last year at times. He's flashed. This is a good matchup for him. And so as a one-week play, I'd probably lean more toward DFS than I would as a streaming option, but Jordan Love would be someone who would be interesting. I'd like it better if we knew for sure that he was playing and that he practiced in full all week long. He got that opportunity. We knew he'd be the starter.
He's definitely going to practice on Wednesday. Aaron Rodgers has not been practicing on Wednesday with the thumb injury, so I'm sure Jordan Love will take advantage of those reps, and then we'll see what happens Thursday and Friday. But Jordan Love's somebody to keep in mind just in case Aaron Rodgers does not go. The quarterbacks are moving on from. No surprise here with the two names on this list. Russell Wilson's just been miserable. 6 straight games now with 15 fantasy points or less. Only one game over 19 fantasy points on the season. Matthew Stafford, the Rams are talking about maybe him coming back from the neck injury and the multiple concussions. I don't know why. So you don't have to worry about Matthew Stafford. These are guys that you can't even trust at this point in 2 quarterback or super flex leagues. Let's transition now to the running backs and the guys on a bye. Again, only 2 teams, so no James Conner, no Deontay Foreman, coming off productive games for both. Best game of the season for Conner with over 100 yards rushing, and Foreman took advantage of the Broncos matchup and the fact that they play with the lead. Chuba Hubbard also not available to you if you've been streaming him in deeper formats. The running backs to add. Now again, this list is very much in flux because you have a lot of different moving parts here with different Steelers, different Jets guys, but I think if you look at it from a matchup perspective, Snell against the Falcons versus Knight against the Vikings, it's a more favorable situation for the Steelers. We'll talk about a few of these situations. Zamir White is more of a insurance policy in case something happens to Josh Jacobs with the calf injury. JaMychal Hasty, same thing in case Travis Etienne can't go. You have the opportunity now to stash J.K. Dobbins, the opportunity to maybe get the handcuff for the 49ers because now Elijah Mitchell's out. Melvin Gordon to the Chiefs. Kieran Williams, the best running back for the Rams now, at least in terms of playing time and production in the passing game. And Mike Boone might be somebody who's going to play in tandem with Latavius Murray moving forward. All right, let's rehash the Steelers situation. So you have potentially no Najee Harris, potentially no Jalen Warren. Harris hurt his abdomen in the Monday night victory against the Colts. Warren was inactive. So, Heath, I'll start with you. If there is no Najee, who's the best Steelers running back?
And there's no Warren?
If there's no Najee.
Okay, if Warren's back, I think Warren will be the best Steelers running back because I think he has more juice. He would split early downs with Benny Snell. He would definitely handle the passing downs. And if they both got 10 carries, I'd expect 10 more yards from Jalen Warren than I would from Benny Snell.
If there is no Warren and no Harris, how good can Benny Snell be?
Benny Snell could be a top 15 running back if he gets the Najee Harris without Jalen Warren role. The question is whether he would and how much they would throw to him. Because I think
probably not going to get a lot in the passing game.
Right.
So most of it's rushing.
If it's rushing only, then I think it's a low-end number 2 running back is what you're looking at, or a high-end flex.
Any difference for you?
Not really. The only thing I'd say is that Snell played a lot of 3rd downs and 4th downs on Monday night. So if he's playing in those same situations against Atlanta, then he would be a candidate to potentially catch a ball or 2.
Had one catch.
More importantly, he wouldn't have Anthony McFarland definitely taking that role away. He really has his most upside is going to come if there is no Najee and if there is no Jalen Warren.
Yes, that's the only reason you should be picking.
That's the only and here's the other point. If I don't need him this week, I'm not even bothering to add him this week because I figure Najee will be back soon enough. I think Zonovan Knight might have a little more long-term upside.
So we had this conversation on the podcast. The point that I made there was that based on what Robert Saleh said, the fact that they made James Robinson inactive, they wanted to see what Bam Knight can do. And what they got out of it was one of their better rushing performances since Breece Hall has been out. And so now you're coming off this production with the potential of no Michael Carter. So while the matchup is tough, and it's much tougher than what the Steelers are facing because the Vikings are very good against the run, they're struggle in terms of pass catching running backs, there might be a little bit long-term appeal here for him. So if you're looking at it from that standpoint, do you go with Knight first as opposed to Snell?
As far as long-term?
As far as just picking up this week.
You could. And then, listen, I think even if Carter plays, we know he's not going to be at 100%. We know he sprained his ankle. So if he plays, Zonovan Knight's going to be involved in what they do. So at least he'll give you something. It just might be no more than 8 carries in the game. Or maybe I should even say 8 touches in the game. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But the upside, Jamie, if there is no Carter, Zonovan Knight against Minnesota should be able to find the end zone at the very least.
Well, I mean, that I think is going to have to probably be some goal line opportunities, but then you have Ty Johnson, who has been involved in the passing game, was a big part of this with Mike White last year when Carter was making all his production in the passing game too. And then what happens if James Robinson's active?
Right. No, I think that there's significant risk for both of these guys, for both Benny Snell and for Zonovan Knight. I think they both have the risk that the proper guys could be out and they could still just be flex options that only touch the ball 10 or 12 times, and it'd be super frustrating. I will say that the Vikings have been so bad against pass-catching running backs. They've actually given up more PPR fantasy points per game than the Falcons this season. So they're bad against the run. I think Knight has a higher floor in terms of catches, assuming the guys that we think are going to be out are.
Yeah.
I just wonder, though, if we're going to sit here come Sunday and go, why did we not pick up Ty Johnson first?
Yeah.
That's the
It's
thing
possible.
that's the wild card to me in all of this, because it was such a blowout against the Bears. Like, how much did they want to just see what Zonovan Knight had to do? I got it right. Zonovan Knight had to do in that game. Kieran Williams, I know we don't like talking about the Rams, but he did play the majority of the snaps versus Cam Akers. He's the one that's been catching passes 2 of 3 games since he's come back from his ankle injury with 3 catches. Is he going to be somebody that in PPR can be a decent flex?
You want 9 or 10 PPR points?
Well, he got you 8, so this is probably what you're looking at.
Yeah, that's the range for Kyron Williams, almost irregardless of what the matchup is. Period. End of story. I don't think that there's going to be an opportunity for him to have a lot of games with 15-plus carries. I don't know if he's necessarily a goal line guy. Cam Akers will still be in the mix. And this is an ugly offense, Jamie. As long as they don't have a quarterback, I don't know how you can feel good about anybody.
I don't feel good about it, but I do think as a flex, like he's definitely someone who I think should be picked up and should probably be rostered in 70% of leagues, probably the highest it gets this late in the year. But looking at the Seahawks, the Raiders, and the Packers over the next 3 weeks, there's a possibility he could have a 10, 15-touch game where he happens to give you 70 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, and if Stafford does come back, that would certainly make it a little bit more appealing for him. So just something to keep in mind there, but more in PPR than in non-PPR. Not going to score a lot of touchdowns for the Rams, unfortunately, for the way that team looks. Running backs you're moving on from, Kenyon Drake, if you want to hold him until J.K. Dobbins does come back, but clearly Gus Edwards is the lead running back now in Baltimore. Cam Akers, if he's not the lead back there, why would you hold him on that bad team? And Clyde Edwards-Helaire, not back for another 3 weeks, and now seemingly replaced potentially by Melvin Gordon. We're looking at the wide receiver and tight end waiver wire options for you for Week 13, and we'll start with the wide receivers on a bye. Again, remember, just 2 teams missing for this week. That is the Cardinals and the Panthers, so you won't have to deal with the DJ Moore frustration. He's not playing, along with DeAndre Hopkins, Marquise Brown, and we hope to get Rondale Moore and potentially Greg Dortch back following their bye in Week 13. The wide receivers to add, there are a lot of them. I like a lot of guys that could be potential helpful options for you. Certainly we want to help those of you in deeper leagues, but Zay Jones should be the best one to add off of the waiver wire. Treylon Burks hopefully will start to produce like Zay Jones is producing, something I never thought I would say. Then you have a lot of guys that could just be in some good situations or in some good matchups for this week. So DeAndre Carter's been great without Mike Williams. Mac Hollins has had 2 productive games. We're hopeful for Jamison Williams. We're hopeful that Elijah Moore builds off what he did last week with Mike White. Michael Gallup coming off his most targets for the Cowboys this season. Van Jefferson has been producing without Allen Robinson on the field, and now Robinson out for the season. You got Sky Moore without Kadarius Toney. There's just a lot of options here. Claypool without Darnell Mooney might get a boost if Justin Fields returns. Isaiah McKenzie finally produced last week after the first time in what feels like forever. Richie James has scored in back-to-back weeks. Quez Watkins has scored in back-to-back weeks. Zacchaeus had a good game without Kyle Pitts on the field, and David Bell now gets Deshaun Watson. He's been playing a lot better of late. Well, let's talk about Zay Jones because he was an absolute monster against the Ravens. Look at this stat line. 14 targets, 11 catches, 145 yards, 27 PPR points. And it's not fluky because his previous game against the Chiefs, he also had double digits in PPR points, and now he's taking on the Lions, and they stink. So can Zay Jones be a starter even in 2 receiver leagues for this week?
So a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, he's not the number 1 receiver in Jacksonville. It is going to be Christian Kirk. He's producing like it, and combined they've had at least 22 targets. So it's almost like a concentration of targets on those 2 guys over the past 2 games, and I think it continues. I think Trevor Lawrence definitely has eyes for Zay Jones. And it also has to be said that a lot of the game that he played this past week was without Travis Etienne on the field. Maybe that opened up some more target opportunities for him.
Well, they throw more to Hasty than they do to Etienne.
But all that being said, and I agree with you, that's very true what they did, I still love it. I still think it's a great matchup. It's a huge opportunity. I like him better in PPR than non-PPR, but he is my favorite wide receiver and one of the top 3 guys at any position to add off the waiver wire this week.
He could be a top 24 wide receiver this week, but if he is, it's going to probably be because some guys disappoint. I think he's going to be right in that 27 to 30-ish type range. If he scores a touchdown, if he gets double-digit targets again, then he's maybe top 20.
In terms of Treylon Burks, Heath, when you look at what, forget about the touchdown because that's fluky. Picking up the fumble from Derrick Henry last week, who cares?
Can't count on that.
But no, I don't want to see that for Henry. 4 catches, 70 yards. He's now got 20 targets in 3 games. They're trying. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily leading to a lot of big games. He did have the over 100-yard performance against the Packers 2 games ago. It's a tough matchup against Philadelphia. Their secondary is a little bit beat up now with C.J. Gardner-Johnson not there. Can Treylon Burks be at least a number 3 receiver for this week, and how much trust do you have in him?
He's a low end number 3 wide receiver. I want to roster him. I want to make sure he's rostered everywhere. I would rather have him, I think, in the fantasy playoffs than I would Zay Jones. I think there's big time upside, but at Philadelphia in this matchup, I really don't want any part of it. He's a high-end number 4, a boom-bust flex. If you have to put him into your flex, the nice thing is the way they're using him on downfield plays, he could make your day in 1 play, but you're going to need that.
I just like the involvement. I don't like that there's been some fluky plays mixed in. The offensive fumble recovery for a touchdown, the 50-yard catch to ice the game.
But take those two plays out there.
But if we take those two plays out, then we're getting low production.
You get a floor though for a guy that they're trying to get going, and so it's how much are they going to eventually, especially if Philly's offense shows up and the Titans can't run the ball.
Sure, he figures to
Ryan
be a big part of
Tannehill,
it.
for what it's worth, 600 plus passing yards the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
He's throwing the ball a lot.
He is.
And so it's different for what we've typically seen from the Titans.
It's actually the last 3 weeks they've been throwing it downfield.
I don't want to look at the fluky plays. I'm with you. But take that away, it's Michael Pittman. That's where
it's pretty close to Michael Pittman, except for what we saw from Michael Pittman
Forget
on Monday
about that.
against
I'm talking
the Steelers.
about the majority of the season.
13 PPR points. That's what you're thinking about. Where does that fit into lineups? I think that's as a number 3 receiver. Yes, he should be picked up. No question about that. We said the same thing last week. But racing him into lineups, I'm not sure if I'm ready to do that.
So number 3 receiver, and if you're stuck, flex option if you need him, and I think the theme is roster him if he's available. All right, let's put the list back up because there were a lot of names that we showed you there, and the way that I frame it on the podcast is there's a 1, there's a 2, and there's a lot of 3s and 4s. And so you see a lot of 3s and 4s. I'm going to leave the floor open to you guys. So Dave, I'll start with you. Your favorite guy, not named Jones or Burks, is who?
Same favorite guy that I had in August, and that's Isaiah McKenzie. Love that he had 10 targets. Huge game against the Lions. Maybe it was because it was the Lions, or maybe it's because the Bills decided to go with him as their slot receiver again, and he finally had a game where he didn't make mistakes. I expect him to continue to be an integral part of that Buffalo offense.
So not a fluke for you?
I don't think it's a fluke.
Okay.
I'll go with Nico Collins. He's got 26 targets over the last 3 games. The yardage has but not been good, and the efficiency's dropped off a little bit. But I do think they'll be behind early and often against the Browns this week. He's a number 3 wide receiver for me.
Just a couple quick rapid fire here. If Field starts, Claypool, any interest?
No.
If Field starts, then Claypool is right there in the Burks range for me.
Okay, so you like him, you're not as excited. The thing I like about Carter and Hollins is we've seen a little bit more production for them. Yep. Carter obviously has been very good, 11 or more PPR points, 2 of his last 3 games without Mike Williams on the field. I've changed this list 100 times, so you'll see it finally on CBSSports.com. It could be a little bit different by the time you're reading it as well. Let's go to the the wide receivers that you're moving on from, the drop candidates here. As I told you, Tyler Boyd has been very disappointing the last 2 weeks, and now Clinton Chase is back. So I don't want to trust him if somebody else does. Dave thinks he's number 3 receiver. Go ahead. Deontay Johnson still looking for his first touchdown. He's been 10 PPR points or less now in 6 straight games. Not worth trusting for me at this point. Robinson and Mooney are out for the season, and Curtis Samuel had no targets last week, and they're just not throwing the ball. 3 straight games with 9 PPR points or less for him. The tight ends to keep an eye on a bye. No big surprise. No one of interest really. The 2 best options right now: Trey McBride without Zach Ertz, and Tommy Tremble's been a little bit better than Ian Thomas, but you're really desperate if you start neither of these 2 guys. The tight ends to add, however, a very interesting list of not so favorable options, but some guys that could be helpful for you this week. Tyler Conklin gets a revenge game against the Vikings. Hayden Hurst, we'll see if he continues to produce with Chase back. Juwan Johnson should have had a touchdown last week. I think we feel a little bit differently about him if that was the case. Much tougher matchup last week than he has this week. Jelani Woods coming off the big game. Logan Thomas gets the Giants. Foster Moreau scored a touchdown last week, so we'll see. For these guys, Hunter Henry should have 2 touchdowns, and Jordan Akins has played better without Brevin Jordan and with Kyle Allen last week. Heath, in terms of Tyler Conklin, I know he's been somebody you've been buying into, selling, he's been all over the place. Looked better last week with Mike White, and the Vikings have been bad against tight end.
Right, and the real key for him most of the season has been how many passes do they throw. And if they throw enough passes, then he gets enough targets. He's a big part of their offense. It's just sometimes they throw 25 to 30 passes. I think they'll be chasing the score in Minnesota. I expect 35-plus pass attempts. That makes him a top 12 tight end. Definitely my favorite option on the waiver wire.
Dave, I know you like Hayden Hurst the best. I know it's not with a lot of confidence, but he's your favorite one.
It's actually Jelani Woods. Okay. I like him a little bit
better. You're buying into it.
What I saw in the game against the Steelers, remember, it's the Steelers. They've always been really good against tight ends. In the second half, they started going to Jelani Woods. They let him play a lot more. I know there was no Kylan Granson. No tight end on Indianapolis had as many targets, catches, or yards as what he had in this game. And he's a huge dude, makes a lot of catches, made a few mistakes in the game. I think they did keep going back to him. First target was a drop. Very next play, caught the ball, had some contested catches as well. I think he's somebody, if you're looking at all these guys and you're thinking, all right, 8 PPR points, I think Conklin's got a great chance to get there. I think Jelani Woods has a chance to get there and maybe do a little bit better than that. So that's why I'll put him at the top of my list. I've got Conklin second, Hurst third.
Okay, so you changed from the podcast guy. All right, so there's the options for you, the tight ends that you're moving on from for this week. And again, not a lot of big name players that I think are worth holding on to, but you're looking at what Tyler Higbee failed to do last week. A little frustrating for him without a target. Greg Dulcich, I don't know how many people are still going to buy into him with the situation there when it comes to Russell Wilson. And then Mike Gesicki, a very frustrating game for the Dolphins tight end, but we've been saying to add and drop Mike Gesicki basically all season long.